The night sky over Tokyo erupts in crimson fury. It's March 9th, 1945, and the city's 8 million inhabitants have no idea that the next 3 hours will rewrite the definition of devastation in human history. 334 Silver Giants, Boeing B-29 superfortresses, thunder across the darkness at just 5,000 feet. Low enough to hear the screams, low enough to feel the heat rising from below. Inside these aircraft, American crews can smell something they'll never forget: burning wood, burning fabric, burning flesh. The stench permeates their pressurized cabins, seeping through every seal. A haunting reminder that war makes no distinction between soldier and civilian, between factory and home. This isn't the war Americans imagined. There are no precision strikes on military installations, no surgical removal of strategic targets. This is something else entirely, a calculated apocalypse designed by one man who understood that sometimes to end a war, you must bring hell to earth. Major General Curtis LeMay had gambled everything on this single night. If it failed, he faced court-martial. If it succeeded, he'd be remembered as either a strategic genius or history's most efficient mass killer. Perhaps both. The Pathfinder aircraft arrive first, dropping their M47 napalm bombs in a massive X pattern across Tokyo's eastern districts. The fires bloom like deadly flowers, marking targets for the waves behind them. Then come the others, hundreds of them, each carrying 7 tons of M69 incendiary bomblets. 6-pound cylinders filled with jellied gasoline that explode into 100-foot streams of liquid fire. Below, families huddle in wooden homes that might as well be kindling. Tokyo is a tinderbox. 95% of its structures built from wood and paper, designed for earthquakes but defenseless against fire. The city's cottage industries, thousands of small workshops producing parts for Japan's war machine, are scattered throughout residential neighborhoods, making every home a potential military target. The Japanese air defenses scramble, but they're unprepared for low-altitude attacks. Their fighters prowl uselessly at higher altitudes. Their anti-aircraft guns, calibrated for high-flying bombers, can't track these swift shadows. Before you learn how this single night killed more people than Hiroshima, subscribe and comment below. What would you have done in LeMay's position? The answer might disturb you more than you expect. To understand how America arrived at this moment of total war, we must rewind to November 1944, when the B-29 superfortress first appeared in the Pacific Theater as humanity's most advanced weapon. The Boeing B-29 represented a quantum leap in aviation technology. With a wingspan of 141 feet and weighing up to 140,000 pounds fully loaded, it dwarfed its predecessor, the B-17 Flying Fortress. 4 Wright R-3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, could push this monster to speeds of 357 miles per hour and altitudes exceeding 31,000 feet. But raw power wasn't the B-29's only innovation. Its pressurized crew compartments meant airmen could fly 16-hour missions in relative comfort, no longer exposed to the bone-numbing cold of high-altitude flight. Remote-controlled gun turrets, directed by sophisticated computing sites, provided defensive firepower without requiring gunners to freeze at their posts. Flush riveting smoothed every surface, reducing drag and extending range to nearly 6,000 miles. The bomber cost over $500,000 each, 5 times the price of a British Lancaster. The entire B-29 program consumed $3 billion, more than the Manhattan Project that would develop the atomic bomb. General Hap Arnold had staked his reputation and possibly the entire future of independent air power on this single aircraft. Yet for all its technological sophistication, the B-29 was rushed into service with catastrophic consequences. Engine fires plagued early operations, accounting for more losses than enemy action. The Wright R-3350 engines, built with magnesium crankcases to save weight, would ignite like shooting stars when they overheated, burning through wing spars in minutes. Of the 414 B-29s lost over Japan, only 147 fell to enemy fire. 267 crashed due to mechanical failures, engine fires, and operational accidents. The first B-29s deployed to bases in China and India in April 1944 under a plan codenamed Operation Matterhorn. They would refuel in China before striking targets in southern Japan. But the logistics proved impossible. Transporting fuel over the Himalayas, the hump, consumed more resources than the missions could justify. 12 raids from Chinese bases accomplished almost nothing. Japan's industrial heartland remained untouched, its war machine churning out weapons, its people confident that their homeland was beyond American reach. That confidence was about to shatter. Everything changed when American forces captured the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the summer of 1944. Within weeks, Navy Seabees had constructed 5 massive airfields, each capable of housing an entire wing of B-29s. These islands sat just 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. For the first time, the B-29's range could be fully exploited. More importantly, the Marianas could be supplied directly by ship from the United States, eliminating the nightmarish logistics that had doomed Operation Matterhorn. The first B-29 touched down on Saipan on October 12, 1944. By late November, over 100 superfortresses crowded the coral runways, their silver fuselages gleaming in the Pacific sun. On November 24, 1944, Brigadier General Emmett Rosie O'Donnell led 111 B-29s on the first raid against Tokyo since the Doolittle raid of April 1942. Their target, the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashi engine plant. Weather obscured the target, and only 24 bombers managed to hit the primary objective. But the psychological impact was immense. American bombers had returned to Japanese skies, and this time they weren't leaving. The 21st Bomber Command's strategy called for high-altitude precision bombing, mimicking successful operations over Germany. B-29s would fly at 28,000 to 34,000 feet above the effective ceiling of Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire, and use their sophisticated Norden bomb sights to strike specific factories and military installations. The theory was sound. The execution was catastrophic. Nobody had accounted for the jet stream, a river of wind at high altitude that could reach speeds of 200 miles per hour. Bomb sights calibrated for European operations proved useless when entire formations were buffeted by winds that could push a falling bomb miles off target. Worse, the climb to altitude strained the temperamental R-3350 engines to their breaking point. Aborts became routine as overheated engines forced bombers to turn back. Strike photography revealed the harsh truth. Bombing accuracy in January 1945 was 12% within 1,000 feet of the target. After months of raids, Japan's war production continued virtually uninterrupted. In Washington, General Hap Arnold fumed. The Joint Chiefs of Staff had promised that strategic bombing would cripple Japan without a costly invasion. Instead, the B-29 campaign was burning through resources and aircrew without visible results. Something had to change. Someone had to take responsibility. That someone was Curtis LeMay. Major General Curtis LeMay arrived in the Marianas on January 20, 1945, carrying the weight of failure and the opportunity for redemption. At 38, the burly cigar-chomping officer had already earned a reputation in Europe for relentless, results-driven leadership. He led bombing missions personally and threatened to court-martial pilots who aborted. His predecessor, Brigadier General Haywood Hansell, had been a gentleman and a theorist, committed to the doctrine of precision bombing. Hansell believed in targeting specific industrial facilities while minimizing civilian casualties, a noble goal that had produced negligible results. LeMay was different. He was a pragmatist who understood that war wasn't about moral purity, it was about winning, and Japan wasn't losing. For 2 months, LeMay continued conventional operations, studying his enemy while his crews flew the same fruitless high-altitude missions. But behind closed doors, he was planning something radical, something so controversial he couldn't risk telling his superiors in Washington until it was too late to stop him. LeMay had discovered 3 critical vulnerabilities in Japanese defenses. First, Japan's night fighter force was virtually non-existent, only 4 units, with just 2 stationed in the home islands. Second, anti-aircraft guns calibrated for high-altitude bombing couldn't effectively track low-flying aircraft. Third, Japanese cities were constructed primarily of wood and paper, with 95% of buildings in industrial areas made from combustible materials. But his most important discovery was about Japanese industry itself. Unlike Germany's concentrated factory complexes, Japan had deliberately dispersed its war production into thousands of small workshops scattered throughout residential neighborhoods. These cottage industries produced everything from aircraft parts to artillery fuses, and they were invisible to high-altitude bombers. To destroy Japan's war machine, LeMay realized, he would have to destroy Japan's cities. And to destroy the cities, he needed fire. Intelligence reports from the Office of Strategic Services had already mapped Tokyo's wards by fire vulnerability. Chemical warfare specialists had developed the M69 incendiary bomb, a 6-pound cylinder packed with napalm that would ignite into a 100-foot stream of fire hot enough to melt steel. Everything was ready. LeMay just needed the courage to give an order that might brand him a war criminal. On March 8, 1945, he called a mission briefing that would shock his air crews into silence. The briefing room at North Field, Tinian, erupted in disbelief when the mission parameters were announced. Low-altitude attack, night operations, and most shocking of all defensive guns removed except the tail turret. Heavy losses are anticipated, the intelligence officers stated flatly. Sergeant William Reb Carter, a left blister gunner, felt his stomach drop. They were going to Tokyo, that much they'd expected. But flying low, at night, stripped of defensive weapons, it sounded like suicide. Captain Dean Fling, Carter's aircraft commander, maintained his usual stern bearing, but even he couldn't hide his concern. Flying a fully loaded B-29 at 5,000 feet over the most heavily defended city in Japan violated every principle they'd been taught. LeMay's reasoning was coldly logical. Japanese night fighters were weak and poorly coordinated. Anti-aircraft batteries weren't designed for low-altitude defense. By flying at night and low, the B-29s would avoid the jet stream winds that had ruined high-altitude accuracy. Removing the guns, which had proven largely ineffective against Japanese fighters anyway, would save weight, allowing each bomber to carry up to 7 tons of incendiary bombs instead of high explosives. The crews would fly individually rather than in formation, each navigating to the target independently. This snake-like approach would stretch the attack over several hours, overwhelming firefighters and allowing fires to spread unchecked. The target wasn't a specific factory or military installation. It was a 16-square-mile zone in eastern Tokyo, centered on the districts of Koto and Chuo, the heart of the city's cottage industry and home to over 1 million civilians. LeMay had chosen this area deliberately. Intelligence maps showed it contained 6 major strategic facilities, including the Hattori Company, which manufactured artillery fuses. But more importantly, Thousands of small workshops were scattered throughout residential neighborhoods, each producing parts for Japan's war machine. Workers and their families lived in the same wooden structures where they labored. Destroy the homes, LeMay reasoned, and you destroy the workshops. Kill the workers, and you cripple production. It wasn't precision bombing, it was area bombing, the complete incineration of everything and everyone within the target zone. And LeMay knew exactly what he was ordering. "We're going to kill a lot of women and kids," he told his staff bluntly. "If we lose the war, we'll be tried as war criminals." But if they won? At 5:36 p.m. on March 9, 1945, the first B-29s began rolling down Tinian's coral runways, their engines straining under maximum bomb loads. Captain Dean Fling's B-29, God's Will, lifted into the tropical dusk, joining a stream of silver bombers that would eventually number 334 aircraft. The islands disappeared behind them as they climbed to cruise altitude. Inside the pressurized cabin, crews settled into the monotony of a 7-hour flight to Japan. Some slept, others played cards. Sergeant Carter squeezed into the padded tunnel over the bomb bay, trying to rest before what promised to be the most terrifying mission of his life. But not all 334 bombers would reach Tokyo. 14 were forced to abort due to mechanical problems, a testament to the B-29's ongoing reliability issues. Several more would crash into the ocean when engines failed. The Pacific swallowed them without witnesses. 320 aircraft continued north through the darkness. Aboard the Pathfinder aircraft, crews checked and rechecked their special loads, M47 napalm bombs designed to start massive fires. These would mark the target zone with a fiery X visible from miles away, guiding the main force to their aiming points. The Pathfinders carried extra fuel and additional radio equipment instead of bombs. Throughout the raid, they would circle Tokyo at 25,000 feet, acting as navigation beacons and relay stations. It was a tactic borrowed from RAF Bomber Command's devastating raids on German cities, and tonight it would prove just as effective. As midnight approached, the bombers made their final turns at Choshi Point, east of Tokyo. This was the initial point, the IP, where they would begin their attack runs. Crews donned flak vests, heavy steel-plated garments that might stop shrapnel but felt like anchors pulling them down. Some were helmets that interfered with radio headsets but offered protection against flying metal. Below them, Tokyo's streetlights still burned. Incredibly, even as the first Pathfinder aircraft approached on their final run, the city remained illuminated, as if inviting destruction. The Japanese had no idea what was coming. Their radar had detected the inbound aircraft, but night raids had always been small and ineffective. Air raid sirens wailed, but many residents ignored them, exhausted by months of false alarms. At 12:08 a.m., March 10, 1945, the attack began. The Pathfinder aircraft struck from multiple angles, dropping their M47 napalm bombs in a precise X pattern across Tokyo's eastern districts. The bombs detonated with white-hot fury, each one starting fires that required mechanized firefighting equipment to control. But Tokyo's fire department had no such equipment, and even if they had, what was coming next would have overwhelmed any force on Earth. The main bomber stream arrived like an endless nightmare. Every minute, more B-29s roared overhead at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. Each aircraft carried 38 clusters of M69 incendiary bomblets, a total of 1,520 individual 6-pound bombs filled with jellied gasoline. The bomb bay doors opened. Clusters tumbled into the darkness. At 2,500 feet, the clusters exploded, releasing their deadly cargo. 38 M69s per cluster, falling in a random pattern that covered entire city blocks. When the bomblets struck the ground, they erupted into 100-foot streams of fire, napalm burning at temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Wooden homes ignited instantly, paper walls disintegrated, bamboo frames became torches. Within minutes, individual fires began merging into something far more terrifying, a general conflagration. Strong winds, gusting between 17 and 28 miles per hour, fanned the flames. What might have been classified as a firestorm became something even worse, a spreading inferno that liquefied asphalt and vaporized human flesh. The heat was so intense that bomber crews flying at 5,000 feet could feel it through their aircraft's aluminum skin. The smell, a sickening combination of burning wood, gasoline, and human tissue, permeated every bomber. Crews at the tail end of the attack stream reported that the stench of burned flesh filled their pressurized cabins, a horror they could never escape or forget. Below, Tokyo's residents faced an impossible choice. Firefighters, equipped only with hand-pumped water and bucket brigades, attempted to combat blazes that jumped from building to building faster than they could respond. Many firefighters died at their posts, overwhelmed by walls of flame. Civilians ran through streets that had become corridors of fire. Mothers clutched children, searching for safety that didn't exist. Some attempted to reach the Sumida River, hoping water would save them. But the river itself seemed to boil as superheated air rolled across its surface. The fires created their own wind, a terrifying phenomenon where intense heat generates powerful updrafts, sucking in air from all directions. These fire winds accelerated to gale force, pulling victims into the inferno like a demon's breath.
Japanese air defenses scrambled in confusion. The Army's 10th Flying Division, responsible for defending Tokyo, possessed 210 fighters. But they were scattered across multiple airfields with no coordination between units. Ground controllers, stunned by the low-altitude approach, issued contradictory orders. Fighter pilots prowled the coast, searching for B-29s at their expected high altitudes. They never looked down. Not a single Japanese fighter made visual contact with the bomber stream. The anti-aircraft batteries fared no better. Tokyo's guns, calibrated for high-altitude defense, couldn't track fast-moving targets at 5,000 feet. Searchlights swept the sky randomly, occasionally catching a B-29 in their beams, but the gunners couldn't adjust their aim quickly enough to hit anything. Barrage balloons, those gas-filled aerial obstacles designed to snare low-flying aircraft, had been deployed around the city. But there were too few of them, and bomber pilots easily avoided the visible cables. Some B-29s did face danger, but it came from an unexpected source, the fires themselves. The massive updrafts created by the conflagration below were powerful enough to toss 70-ton bombers like toys. Several aircraft were caught in these thermals, their crews fighting desperately to maintain control as they were hurled hundreds of feet higher in seconds. One B-29 commander later reported, "The airplane felt like it was being grabbed by a giant hand and thrown into the sky." The turbulence was so severe that some crews feared their aircraft would break apart. 3 B-29s were consumed by the fires below, their crews unable to escape the catastrophic updrafts. The intense heat ignited their fuel tanks, and they fell into the inferno as burning torches. Despite these losses, LeMay's gamble was paying off. The combination of night operations, low altitude, and overwhelming numbers had effectively neutralized Japanese defenses. Where conventional raids had suffered loss rates of 4 to 5%, tonight's operation would lose only 27 aircraft out of 279 that reached the target, a loss rate of less than 10%. But the price paid by Tokyo's residents would be incalculable. By 2 a.m., 15 square miles of the city were burning. By 3 a.m., the fires had merged into a single apocalyptic blaze visible from 150 miles away. Bomber crews returning to the Marianas could still see the glow on the horizon hours after leaving the target.
As dawn broke over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, the true scope of the devastation became clear. 16 square miles of the city center, 10,000 acres, had been completely destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police would later record 267,171 buildings reduced to ash and rubble. Over 1 million people, 15% of Tokyo's population, were homeless, many clutching the few possessions they'd managed to save. And the dead. Dear God, the dead. Initial estimates put the death toll at 83,793. Later research suggested the true figure approached 100,000, making Operation Meeting House the deadliest single air raid in human history, exceeding both the bombing of Dresden and the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as individual events. Bodies lined the streets, many burned beyond recognition. The Sumida River, where thousands had sought refuge, became a mass grave. People who had jumped into the water to escape the heat had been boiled alive or suffocated by smoke. Corpses floated downstream for days. Hospitals were overwhelmed with burn victims. Doctors worked without supplies, watching patients die from injuries no medicine could treat. The smell of death permeated the city, a sickly sweet stench that lingered for weeks. Katsumoto Sayotome, an 8-year-old boy who survived the raid, would later recall, "The fire was like a living thing. It moved, it breathed, it hunted. You could run from it, but it was always faster. I saw people catch fire just from the heat in the air. They never even touched the flames." For American bomber crews returning to the Marianas, the mission was both a triumph and a trauma. They had accomplished what months of conventional bombing had failed to achieve: devastating damage to Japan's war production. Strike photography revealed that the target zone had been completely obliterated. But the cost haunted them. These were professional airmen trained to destroy military targets, not incinerate civilians by the tens of thousands. The smell of burned flesh that had filled their aircraft wouldn't wash out. Some crews reported that it lingered in their uniforms for weeks, no matter how many times they were cleaned. Sergeant Carter, the gunner aboard God's Will, wrote in his diary, "We knew we'd killed a lot of people. Women, children. We didn't talk about it. What could we say?" But Curtis LeMay had no doubts. His gamble had worked. The success of Operation Meeting House transformed American strategy overnight. LeMay had proven that low-altitude incendiary attacks could devastate Japanese cities with acceptable losses. Within days, he was planning follow-up raids. On March 11, just 36 hours after the Tokyo raid, 310 B-29s attacked Nagoya. The bombing was more dispersed than Tokyo, but still destroyed 2.05 square miles of the city. No B-29s were lost to Japanese defenses, a stunning statistic that confirmed LeMay's tactics. On the night of March 13-14, 274 superfortresses struck Osaka, Japan's second-largest city. 8 square miles burned. 2 aircraft were lost. Kobe fell on March 16-17 when 331 B-29s destroyed half the city's area, killed 8,000 people, and left 650,000 homeless. The resulting firestorm was visible from 100 miles at sea. Nagoya was hit again on March 18-19, losing another 2.95 square miles. In just 10 days, LeMay's 21 Bomber Command had conducted 5 major firebombing raids, flown 1,595 sorties, and dropped 9,373 tons of incendiary bombs. Approximately 32 square miles across 4 cities had been incinerated. The human cost was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested 130,000 dead and over 2.5 million people left homeless. But these numbers told only part of the story. Japan's dispersed war industry, those thousands of cottage workshops producing parts for aircraft, artillery shells, and other weapons, had been gutted.
American intelligence estimated that Tokyo's industrial output had been cut in half. Other cities showed similar declines. But LeMay had exhausted his supply of incendiary bombs. The fire raids had consumed the entire stockpile accumulated over months. 21 Bomber Command would need to return to conventional operations while waiting for resupply. On March 23-24, B-29s attempted a precision night attack on the Mitsubishi aircraft engine factory. 5 of 251 aircraft were shot down, a reminder that conventional tactics still carried higher risks. Throughout April and May, LeMay mixed precision strikes against specific factories with smaller firebombing raids as supplies of M69 incendiaries arrived. The pressure on Japan was relentless, methodical, and increasingly devastating. Japanese Lieutenant General Noboru Tozo, a key air defense leader, later admitted, "After the March fire raids, I knew Japan could not win the war. The only question was how long we would continue fighting." But the Japanese government showed no signs of surrender. If anything, their rhetoric became more defiant.
By mid-May 1945, after the successful Okinawa campaign freed up resources, LeMay launched an intensified fire blitz that would make the March raids look like rehearsals. On May 13, 472 B-29s struck Nagoya in daylight, destroying 3.15 square miles. The Japanese mounted a strong defense, downing 2 superfortresses and damaging 64 others. American crews claim 18 Japanese fighters destroyed. 3 days later, 457 B-29s returned to Nagoya at night. Japanese night defenses proved pathetic. The 3 bombers lost all crashed due to mechanical problems, not enemy action. Another 3.82 square miles burned. The 2 raids on Nagoya killed 3,866 Japanese and rendered 472,700 homeless. Tokyo was struck twice more in late May. On the night of May 23, 520 B-29s destroyed 5.3 square miles of southern Tokyo, losing 17 aircraft. 2 nights later, 502 superfortresses incinerated 16.8 square miles of central Tokyo, including government ministry headquarters and portions of the imperial palace grounds. Crews had been explicitly briefed not to target Emperor Hirohito's palace. The U.S. government feared that killing the emperor might stiffen Japanese resistance rather than break it. But the fires spread indiscriminately, and parts of the palace complex were damaged anyway. The May 25 raid proved costly. Japanese defenses were more prepared, and 26 B-29s were shot down, with another 100 damaged. But the destruction was so complete that by the end of May, more than half of Tokyo had been destroyed, and the city was removed from 21 Bomber Command's target list. There was simply nothing left to burn. Throughout June and July, LeMay expanded operations to smaller cities. Osaka, Yokohama, Kobe, and Kawasaki were systematically destroyed. Medium-sized cities, places like Hamamatsu, Kagoshima, and Okayama, found themselves targeted despite having limited military value. LeMay even began dropping leaflets warning civilians that their cities would be firebombed in 3 days. It was psychological warfare on a massive scale. Either evacuate and cripple your own war production, or stay and die. Many Japanese civilians fled to the countryside, further disrupting war production. Those who remained lived in constant terror, knowing that any night might bring the silver bombers and their rain of fire. By early August 1945, 67 Japanese cities had been firebombed. Conventional estimates suggested 220,000 civilians killed. More recent research puts the figure as high as 500,000 dead and 5 million homeless.
The psychological impact of the fire raids equaled their physical destruction. Japanese civilians, who had been told their homeland was unconquerable, watched their cities burn night after night with no effective defense. The Japanese government's propaganda machine struggled to maintain morale. Early in the war, they had claimed that divine wind, kamikaze, would protect the homeland. Now that protection had proven illusory. American bombers came and went with impunity. By June 1945, the Japanese military had made a fateful decision: cease most opposition to Allied air raids and conserve aircraft for the anticipated invasion of the home islands. This meant that B-29s faced even less resistance, allowing them to fly with near immunity. Industrial production collapsed. Japan had intentionally decentralized 90% of its war-related manufacturing into small workshops, specifically to avoid the concentrated factory bombing that had devastated Germany. LeMay's area bombing had neutralized that strategy completely. Vital war industries were forced to relocate to remote caves and mountain bunkers, dramatically reducing output. Workers who survived the raids were often homeless, malnourished, and demoralized. Absenteeism soared. Meanwhile, LeMay had launched another campaign that received less attention but proved equally devastating: Operation Starvation. Starting in March 1945, B-29s dropped thousands of naval mines in Japanese harbors and waterways. These mines disrupted shipping routes that supplied Japan with food and raw materials. The island nation, dependent on imports for survival, began to starve. Rice rations were cut repeatedly. Industrial materials became scarce. The economy ground toward collapse. The fire raids and the mining campaign worked in synergy. Cities burned, factories shut down, ships couldn't move supplies. The civilian population, already traumatized by bombing, now faced starvation. Emperor Hirohito, who had remained largely detached from war planning, toured the devastated areas of Tokyo in March 1945. The experience profoundly affected him. For the first time, he began actively questioning Japan's military leadership about the feasibility of continuing the war. But the Supreme War Council, the six-member body that controlled Japanese military policy, remained divided. Army leaders insisted that Japan could achieve a favorable negotiated peace by inflicting massive casualties on American invasion forces. They prepared for Operation Ketsugo, the decisive battle for the homeland. Every Japanese civilian would become a soldier. Every hillside would become a fortress. Japan would never surrender. Or so they claimed.
By August 1945, the strategic situation was clear. Japan had lost the war in every meaningful sense. Its cities were ruins. Its industrial capacity was shattered. Its navy and air force were destroyed. Its people were starving. But it had not surrendered. American military planners prepared for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, scheduled to begin in November 1945. Intelligence estimates predicted 1 million Allied casualties if ground forces had to fight their way through Japan's prepared defenses. LeMay continued bombing, but he faced a new problem. He was running out of targets. Most major cities had already been destroyed. The remaining cities were smaller, with limited military value. Then, on August 6, 1945, everything changed. The B-29 Enola Gay, flown by Colonel Paul Tibbets and part of the specially modified 509th Composite Group, dropped a single bomb on Hiroshima. The atomic weapon Little Boy exploded with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT, instantly killing an estimated 70,000 people and obliterating the city center. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, dropped a plutonium bomb called Fat Man on Nagasaki, killing another 40,000. The atomic bombs shocked the world. But here's what few realize. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9-10 had killed more people than either atomic bomb individually. The total fire raid death toll exceeded both atomic bombs combined. The atomic weapons weren't more destructive than conventional bombing. They were simply more efficient.
One aircraft, one bomb, instant devastation. The psychological impact was immense. If Americans could destroy cities with single bombs, how could Japan defend itself? On August 9, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, shattering any hope of Soviet mediation for a negotiated peace. Emperor Hirohito, breaking precedent, intervened directly in the Supreme War Council's deliberations. On August 15, 1945, he recorded a radio address announcing Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration's terms. Japan would surrender unconditionally. When asked later why he had decided to end the war, Hirohito cited several factors: the atomic bombs, the Soviet invasion, and, critically, the new and cruel bomb, the incendiary raids, and the complete naval blockade. The fire raids had succeeded, but at what cost?
The aftermath of the B-29 firebombing campaign left scars that would take decades to heal, if they ever truly did. Japan's post-war recovery was hampered by the scale of urban destruction. Millions of homeless citizens crowded into whatever shelter they could find. Disease spread through the ruins. Food shortages, already severe during the war, worsened in its immediate aftermath. American occupation forces were shocked by what they found. Captain Robert Schrod, a war correspondent, wrote, "Tokyo was not a city. It was a desolation. Block after block showed nothing but rubble and a few charred walls. The stench of death still lingered months after the raids." The psychological trauma proved even more enduring. Survivors suffered what we would now recognize as PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks, survivor's guilt. Many developed a lifelong fear of fire. Children who lived through the raids carried the memories into old age. Katsumoto Saotome, the survivor who witnessed the March 9–10 Tokyo raid as a child, dedicated his life to preserving the memory of that night. He collected survivor testimonies, established the center of the Tokyo raids and war damage, and fought against historical amnesia. "The atomic bombs get all the attention," Saotome said in interviews, "but more people died in Tokyo that single night than died in Hiroshima. Why doesn't the world remember?" For American veterans, the moral reckoning was complex. Many defended the raids as necessary to end the war and save lives that would have been lost in an invasion. The projected casualty figures for Operation Downfall, 1 million Allied dead and wounded, justified almost any alternative. But others struggled with what they had done. Robert McNamara, who worked on targeting analysis for LeMay during the war, later reflected, "LeMay said if we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals, and I think he's right. He, and I'd say I, were behaving as war criminals." The question of whether the fire raids constituted a war crime remains debated. The targeting of civilian populations violated principles later codified in the Geneva Conventions. But during World War II, no clear international law prohibited area bombing, especially when military targets were dispersed through civilian areas. The fire raids existed in a moral gray zone, tactically effective, strategically justified, and ethically problematic.
Curtis LeMay never expressed regret for the firebombing campaign. He received the Distinguished Service Medal and continued his career, eventually becoming Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. His legacy remains controversial. To some, he was a brilliant strategist who shortened the war and saved millions of lives. To others, he was the architect of mass murder on an unprecedented scale. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between. LeMay made a calculation that nations at war have made throughout history. Killing enemy civilians would break their will to fight and save lives on his own side. Whether that calculation was morally justified depends on questions philosophers still debate. What cannot be debated is the impact. The B-29 fire raids demonstrated that modern air power could destroy cities with efficiency that ancient conquerors could never have imagined. They established patterns of strategic bombing that would define conflicts throughout the Cold War.
They also revealed an uncomfortable truth about industrial warfare. In total war, the distinction between soldier and civilian becomes meaningless. When factories are in neighborhoods and workers produce weapons in their homes, everyone becomes a target. Today, memorials across Japan commemorate the victims of the air raids. In Tokyo, the center of the Tokyo raids and war damage preserves survivor testimonies and debris from B-29s. In Higashi-Murayama, a Buddhist statue honors 11 American crewmen killed when their bomber crashed, erected by a Japanese farmer who sought out their families after the war. These memorials remind us that wars have no winners, only survivors. The B-29 Superfortress was retired from active service in 1960. Two remain airworthy today, Fifi and Doc. They fly at air shows, beautiful and terrible reminders of what technology can achieve when directed toward destruction. The carpet bombing campaign that Japan never recovered from changed the nature of modern warfare. It proved that cities could be erased, populations could be devastated, and nations could be brought to their knees without a single soldier crossing their borders. Whether this represents progress or tragedy depends on where you stand, in the cockpit of the bomber or in the burning streets below. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical sources and documented records.